All right, so we're going to be in Nehemiah chapter number 2. If you've been with us in the last couple of weeks, we have started a series walking through the book of Nehemiah. And the first week that we talked about the passion that God has put within people. And so we asked the question, what has God placed so deeply within you that even when you try to push it to the side, it's still there? It might be a passion for helping people. I had a guy that I knew one time. He's like, listen, Dave, I'm not really good at much of anything, but you know what I'm good at? I'm good at making money. I kid you not. I had a guy that told me that. He's like, and so I'm not going to be one who you're going to find volunteering to help with student ministry. He's like, but I'll fund it. And he knew the passion that God had put within him, and he used that passion appropriately. He said, listen, if you have a student that needs to go to camp, I'll pay for that student that needs to go to camp. If you have a party, I'll pay for that party. It was really cool. And so for every person, I believe that God has put within them a certain passion. I know, folks, within this congregation, that God has put within you a passion for those who have a hard time helping themselves. Angel Beard is one of them, and I don't see her here right now, but she's probably back with the children, would be my guess. And it's just really neat, like when she found out that Linda was struggling and Larry has to work and try to take care of the grandkids, she started organizing people to take them meals. And as she organized people to take them meals, she also took meals herself. I saw her, Marla Beals, who normally sits right up here. If you're not familiar with Marla, her mom fell this past week, and so Marla's helping to take care of her. And I wasn't surprised to see shortly after that Angel saying, hey, would it help if we provided some meals for your mom? And so God has put within her a passion for those who are hurting. And God has done the same for some of you. And for Curtis and for others that are involved in student ministry, a passion for students. It's not everybody that has that passion. I used to have people when I was in student ministry that would say, how do you do it? How do you put up with those students week in and week out? I'm like, I love it. It's fun because God had placed within me that passion. And I would imagine if you would ask Curtis, how do you do it? He'd say, I love it. When God has placed a passion deep within you, you can't help but allow that to flow out. You wonder, why is it that those who sing and those who play instruments, why is it that they are willing to come in an hour and 45 minutes early every Sunday to prepare to lead in worship? Why do they do it? Why? Because God has placed within them a passion that they are willing to allow to come out. Believe it or not, they are typically in here every other Thursday practicing as well. Why? They have this deeply held passion that God has put within them. And instead of keeping it there and doing nothing, they have put feet to the passion that God has given them. And listen, they're not the only ones. We have people that work with our children and they spend time through the week studying and preparing to teach the children the Word of God and how to have a relationship with Jesus and grow in that. So what is that deeply given passion? That was our first week. Last week we talked about the time that it takes to allow that passion to be turned into a vision. So Nehemiah, he had a God-given passion. His passion was to see Jerusalem rebuilt. He knew that his people were living in disgrace, that they were demoralized in a lot of ways. And so he had a passion, a God-given passion. He took time, 4 months he took before he allowed that passion to be turned into a vision. And then, you know what? He went for it. When King Artaxerxes said, and this is the beginning of chapter number 2, what's wrong? I can see that there is a sadness of heart there. What's going on? You know what? He was ready to go ahead and say, here's what God has put within me. And Nehemiah laid out for King Artaxerxes. He said, here's what I believe God wants me to do. And you know what? God saw fit to allow that to come to fruition. So we began asking questions. What's your God-given passion? Are you willing to take the time necessary for that passion to be turned into vision? We talked last week at least a little bit about, you know what, some people as they think about a passion that they have, they just do this. It's like, boom, away they go. I've got a passion and boom, here I go. But they have no plan or no vision behind it. And then that passion, it wanes quickly because it's like, I don't even know what I'm doing. I don't know why I'm doing it. I'm just going. Somebody told me to run, so I'm running. Forrest Gump, right? That's just the first thing that came to my mind. But listen, Nehemiah knew that there had to be more than a passion. There needed to be a vision. There needed to be a plan for how this was going to be worked out. And so for 4 months he prayed, and then God gave him that opportunity. And you know what? We encourage you, take the time to allow your passion to be turned into vision, and then you know what? Go for it. And that brings us to today, which is a call to action. A call to action, taking that God-given passion and vision and turning it into action. And we're walking through this in 3 weeks. I mean, this is week number 3 in this series. And I want to be very clear of what I'm not asking you to do. I am not asking you to be able to keep up with this series. I'm not asking you that on week 1, you needed to be able to say, okay, well, I know exactly what my God-given passion is. And by the time I started preaching or finished preaching last week, you needed to have a vision. And I'm not asking that by the time we get to week number 3, that you're ready for that vision to become action. And you're like, all right, here we go. How many months did we say it took for Nehemiah before his passion became a vision? 4, right? It took 4 months. Took 4 months of him praying and seeking God and going to him. And sometimes it takes even longer than that for the passion to be turned into a vision that can be placed into action. And so I'm not asking you to keep up with this series necessarily, to be able to follow it step by step and be able to implement everything exactly when I preach it. What I'm asking you to do is be able to say, okay, here's the thing. I need to know what passion God has put within me. You shouldn't have to search hard for what passion God has put within you, right? Usually people have a decent idea of how God has made them. It doesn't take much to, if you were to ask me, what are the things that you're passionate about, Dave? I'm passionate about people. I'm almost ashamed to admit it, but I am passionate about sports. Sometimes I get a little bit too passionate about sports. Okay, confession time. During the walkthrough, I was talking to the team about this. I am almost nearly as distraught over the Patriots winning a game as I am over my Steelers losing. When I watch football, when I watch the Patriots in particular, and if you're a Patriots fan, listen, I have nothing against you. I had a young lady at our house last night, and she was a Patriots fan, and you know she'll repent eventually, I would imagine. I don't know, but no. I have some good friends who are Patriots fans, but like I get passionate about that. So I'm passionate about people. I'm passionate about sports. I'm passionate about family. If you get a chance to watch our family interact, you'll know we like to spend time with each other. We enjoy one another. I will not overwork myself at the expense of my family. I'm just not going to do it. What I normally will do is when they go to bed, then I'll just work longer, which means that I sleep less, but I still get to spend just as much time with my family. Like, I'm passionate about my family, so it doesn't take long for somebody, if they ask me, what are you passionate about? I'm passionate about people, reaching them with the gospel of Jesus Christ and seeing them grow. I'm passionate about sports, and I'm passionate about my family. Everything else can kind of come and go, but those things I'm passionate about. And so if I was to ask you, what are you passionate about? Chances are pretty good. You probably have a general idea of how God has built you. Vision. Allowing that passion to be turned into a vision. Now I got to be honest with you. My passion for sports, honestly, I try to tamp it down more than I try to let it like flourish a little bit. But to be honest, I mean, sometimes my passion for sports allows me to have conversations with people that we just have a connection about sports, and so we can carry on conversations that way. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing. But the other two things, the passion for people and the passion for my family, those are things that it's like, okay, God, what kind of a vision do you want so that I can move these two things forward? And that's something that has to be a God-given thing. And then whenever it comes to placing that into action, what does that look like? What does that look like? And so we're going to talk about a call to action. If you have your Bibles, we're going to be in Nehemiah chapter number 2. If you don't have a Bible, we have a bookshelf right over there. On that bookshelf, there are Bibles. I encourage you to grab one. You can keep it for yourself. You don't need to return it to us. You can put your name in it. I encourage you to read it at home, read it when you bring it back, all of those different things. So Nehemiah chapter number 2. Now we read verses 1 through 10. Which was, again, Nehemiah going to Artaxerxes, who was the king. Artaxerxes looks at him and says, "Oh, man, you kind of look sad, and you're not normally sad." And so Nehemiah prays quickly, and then he just comes out with it. Well, here's the passion that God has given me, and here's the vision that I have to see the walls of Jerusalem rebuilt. We pick up in verse number 11. So he has told the king, here's the vision that I have. Here's the things that I need. I need these letters kind of in advance to help me have safe travel and safe passage. I need this as far as the resources. And then we see that he goes to Jerusalem. So in verse number 11, we pick this up. This is Nehemiah talking. "I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few men." Now, if you might be wondering, why would he set out at night? I need you to understand, again, the historical background of this. Because otherwise it doesn't make sense why he sets out at night. Remember, the Babylonians had come in and they had taken the children of Israel. They had conquered them, and they had removed them. They had exiled them. And so the goal was this: okay, we're going to exile some of the Jewish people, and we are going to then send in some of our people. And so what happens is that rather than the Jewish people being able to kind of rise up and revolt against the government, there's not enough of them to really make a difference, because a lot of them have been exiled, especially the stronger, the more intelligent, the better looking, all of those things. And you might think, well, that sounds kind of bad, but that's kind of how they did it. They took the best and they exiled them. And you actually see in a number of places, you can see this in Esther. You see that Esther rises to a position of prominence as the queen. You see Nehemiah. He has risen to a position of prominence. He is the cupbearer for the king. He is one who is very much trusted. And so a lot of them have been exiled. Well, Cyrus had said, and you can see this in Ezra chapter number 1, Cyrus had said, you know what? Cyrus now, by the way, so the Babylonians had been the one that exiled, and then Persians had taken over and they had conquered the Babylonian Empire, which meant that they had then taken over rule of all of the territories and all of the places that the Babylonians had conquered, and this would be the Jewish people as well. Well, Cyrus and the Persians, they had a slightly different way of dealing with things. They wanted the people to be happy, and so you see this in Ezra chapter number 1, and you see this as a God thing. He says, you know what, actually, go back. And he sends some of the Jewish people back to Jerusalem. And you see, and so chapters 1 through 6 of Ezra, and I don't expect you to remember all of this. If you are a note taker, you can kind of jot this stuff down. Chapters 1 through 6 of Ezra, you're going to see Zerubbabel leading a group of people, and Jeshua as well. They lead a group of people back. You're going to find in chapter 7 through the end of the book of Ezra, you're going to see that Ezra then is going back, and he's kind of reinstituting and rebuilding the people and the worship and all of that. Reinstituting the sacrifices, but the walls are still torn down. And so you're still having people in Jerusalem who are not Jewish people. And there were still those who had the old Babylonian way of thinking, which is, oh man, this type of a plan where we allow Jerusalem to rebuild the walls, that's going to lead them to revolt. And so whenever you wonder, why did he go out at night? You need to understand that some of the rulers in Jerusalem were not Jewish people. They were still not all Jewish people, and you're going to find that really quickly. So he sets out at night with a few men. "I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart." Now, we already know that what God had put in his heart was that God-given passion, right? Everybody say God-given passion. God-given passion. That's what was in his heart. I hadn't told anyone what God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one that I was riding on. So if you're a visual person, you kind of get an idea. He takes just a few men. They only have one they call it a mount. So whether it's a donkey, a mule, a horse, they only have one that they're going out with, not wanting to make a lot of noise, not wanting to make a lot of ruckus. They're going out, though, and here's what they're going to do. By night I went out through the valley gate toward the jackal well and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. Now, some of these things aren't going to make sense. I'm going to show you a visual picture in just a moment that'll hopefully help bring it a little bit into perspective. Then I moved on toward the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there was not enough room for my mount to get through. Why would that be? Well, the walls were in ruin. There was a lot of rubble around. And if you're going to get an animal through, it's going to be rather difficult in some places. So they weren't able to get through. So I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. Now, he had left through the valley gate, and he goes back through the valley gate. And here's kind of what's happening. Now, this isn't the best visual picture in all the world. But let me just point here, and you can see on the screen. So right around in here is going to be the valley gate. He's going to go out and he's going to survey counterclockwise. The next visual that I have up is a little bit easier to see. It's just the other one had kind of the way that walls kind of look as far as how they would have rebuilt them and various things like that. But this next one just kind of shows you a little bit more clearly where he would have come out of. And so you kind of have the visual from the previous slide, right? And so he's going to come out the valley gate. He's going to go counterclockwise. And it says, you'll remember reading that he had gone towards the jackal well, towards the dung gate. Now, if you wonder, what's the dung gate? Well, it sounds about the way that it is. It would have been the gate that people would have gone out. The Hinnom Valley would have been the place where there was this garbage heap where they would take and they would put all of their trash there. It was a burning heap that basically never went out. And so if you're going to take your refuse, your trash, you're going to take it out through that. There's also going to be kind of, it sounds kind of gross, but it's just the way that it is, kind of a stream, so to speak, a septic stream that is going to then enter in. It's going to go out through there. And it's going to kind of enter into another body of water. I know, again, we have more sophisticated ways of dealing with waste now, but from the time that mankind has been created, there has been waste, and they've always had to have a way to deal with it. So the dung gate would have been where people would have gone out to deal with those things. He continues going around that, so again, going counterclockwise to the fountain gate. Now remember, he's not able to get through, and so it says that he went up the valley. It's likely the Kidron Valley, so he probably is near the wall, goes away from the wall, continues to travel up and to check out and to examine the wall. Well, it says that he turns around and he's going to travel back and he's going to go into the valley gate again. And so he didn't encompass, or he didn't look at the whole entirety of the wall that night, but he went out and he got a pretty good picture of what was happening. He had a pretty good picture of the wall and the gates. So a God-given passion and a vision does not eliminate proper planning. He needed to go out and really get for himself an understanding. Now, remember, if we would go back to Nehemiah chapter number 1, he had a few friends who came back and he said, hey, how are things in Jerusalem? Not good. Not good. Things are in disrepair. The people, they're discouraged. The walls are broken down. So he has a general understanding, but he goes out there and he gets an exact understanding. It's kind of like if you've ever worked in construction. You might have somebody, or really a lot of different things. You might have somebody that calls you up and says, hey, I need somebody to install a door, or I need somebody to do this. What typically happens? You typically will find that somebody comes out to give you an estimate, right? Because having done some construction myself, typically what people think needs done and what actually needs done are two very different things. Oh, I just need a little bit of work done here. Well, that little bit of work, had somebody one time who wanted to put in a sliding door and this is on a load-bearing wall, and it's just like, well, why can't we just take out that window, put in a sliding glass door? It shouldn't be all that difficult. We'll just cut in a hole. Well, let's see. It's going to require us to be able to stabilize everything that's above, because if you're talking a load-bearing wall, load-bearing is exactly what it sounds like. It bears a load. You take out the things that support it, and what happens? Right? And so like, hey, I just need somebody to put in a sliding glass door. Okay, well, that'll cost, $1,300. Well, you get out there, you not only have to put in a sliding glass door, you have to put in a header, you had to take out half the wall, you have to support the whole structure. And so normally you'll send somebody out that will give an estimate, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. A lot of you have worked maybe in an industry somewhat similar to that, where you have to give an estimate because you don't know what you're going to run into. Nehemiah, instead of just saying, hey, here we go, let's build the wall, he goes out, he takes a look at it. Wow, it's so bad I can't even get through in this one spot. Okay, so here's what it's going to take, and here's what. So he goes out, and he has this passion, and he has this vision, but he also plans. Now listen, some people can get wrapped up in planning and planning and planning and planning and never do anything. That can be frustrating to a lot of people. But if you just run hard and you don't plan, that can be equally frustrating. Anybody ever been with somebody that's like, hey, let's just do this, and you kind of get into it, and it's like, well, I don't really know what we need. Oh, man, we need this, and oh, shoot, well, we should have done this, and then you get halfway through. It's kind of like trying to construct something. Not just men do this. I think probably some women do this without the instructions, right? You get something in a box, and I don't need the instructions. I've put, I don't know how many of these things together. Back in my day, like, you just put this in, and you get it almost done. And it's like, oh, what's this piece? Oh, well, shoot, that was supposed to go back in step number 2. That can be frustrating, right? Because then you have to, like, take things apart, and you got a lot of wasted time and effort. And so Nehemiah goes through the proper planning. It's important for us whenever we think about opportunities. Curtis and I, this past week, we sat down, and for actually a little over 2 hours, it's like, okay, what are the things that we are going to need if we're going to have a successful Super Bowl party? What are the things we need to talk about? What are the things we need to think through? How many people do we need? Brainstorm, like all the different areas we need people. It takes planning. Okay, so he's gone out, he's looked at it, he's planned. It says the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing. Why? Because he did it at night. Because as yet, I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or the nobles or the officials or any others who would be doing the work. Then I said to them, so he hasn't yet said, here's what we're doing. But now he says, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be a disgrace. Do you see that it's not just about him, it's about the people. It's about all of them together. And he says, listen, we're in this together. Let's build the wall. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God upon me and what the king had said to me. And they replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began this good work. Man, this is like every pastor's dream right here. You put forth a plan and everybody goes, let's do it. Right? This is pretty much any parent's dream. You talk to your kids like, hey, we've got this weekend plan. And they're like, oh, man, sounds like fun. Let's go. But it's like, oh, like, are we going to be able to use our phones? Like, are we going to have electricity? Are we going to have, well, have you thought about this? Like, they're excited. They're like, okay, there's a plan in place. Let's go. I'll be honest. My expectation whenever we talk about this Super Bowl party, just bare my soul, bare my heart right here. My expectation at this point is that you guys are all going to rally around it, and we're going to see this thing go off without a hitch. And we're going to see people come to know Jesus Christ as their Savior. Like, that's my expectation, because it's like, okay, so he says, I told them about the gracious hand of my God upon me and what the king had said to me. Like, I've told them about my passion. I've told them about my vision. How many of you are ready? I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but aren't you ready to do something? Aren't you ready to say, all right, we talk about reaching people. We talk about, let's do it. And so we say we had two emphases heading into 2018, students and outreach. Oh my goodness, by the first week in February, we have an event that combines two, students and outreach. Wow, that almost sounds like a God-created, God-given thing right there, right? And so it's like, let's go, we can make this happen. So they said, let us rebuild, let's go, we're going to make this happen. All right, the God-given passion and vision rarely remains personal. All the way back in Persia, whenever Nehemiah had a passion for his homeland, it was a personal thing. And you could tell it was personal. You look back to Nehemiah 1, it was personal. God had put within him this passion to see Jerusalem and the walls rebuilt. For 4 months, he prayed about this. He then talks to the king, and the king says, yeah, go. So he travels to Jerusalem. And what had been a very personal passion stopped being personal. What had been a very personal passion stopped being personal. And it was time to be somebody that was putting things into action. And he says, here's what God has given for us to do. The reality is this. Maybe not everyone in here is going to have a passion that turns to vision, that gets put into action. But what God has put within you is to say, you know what? I'm going to be one who comes along and helps rebuild that wall. I'm going to be one of those workers. I'm going to be one of those people. And we're going to see in later weeks how it takes everyone working together to make this happen. Will you be a part of the team? Will you be a part of the team? So the God-given passion and the vision, they rarely remain personal. Verse number 19, we're almost done. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard about it. Now remember, what was the reaction of all the other people? Let's do it. Everybody say, let's do it.
Let's do it.
Yeah, there we go. It's kind of like the Nike thing, right? Just do it, right? That's their whole slogan. Just do it. And so all of them are excited, but now you have these three people. And it says, what is this you're doing? It says that they mocked and ridiculed us. Are you rebelling against the king? Now, again, the reason that Nehemiah had to be so careful about the plan for this is that once a city had its walls rebuilt, and it was a fortified city, that meant that they were able to defend themselves. That meant that they had a place that they could call their home. And so it was natural. And check this out. This shouldn't be surprising because the Jews were exiled and other people were brought in. So you now have a Horonite, an Ammonite, and an Arab. And they have been brought in, and they have been ones who have been rulers and officials in Jerusalem up until this point. That was the way that the Babylonians had designed things. And even as the Persian Empire went in, they allowed people to return, but a lot of times they left these officials in place. And so their responsibility would typically be to report back to the king, hey, we have kind of an uprising over here. These people, they're kind of getting a little bit too much in mind. And so they say, listen, what are you doing? Are you trying to rise up against the king? And the reality is this, opposition is to be expected. If you're going to do a good work, a work of God, you can expect some opposition. I keep mentioning the same event, which is the Super Bowl party coming up. And I keep referencing back to previous things that happened at previous Super Bowl parties that we've done. And I'll never forget, we had a guy in the church who was just largely opposed to us having a Super Bowl party. And I don't know if you remember the Janet Jackson incident back at the halftime of the Super Bowl. Anybody remember that? All right. So I have a gentleman comes to me afterwards, and he says, and that's why you shouldn't have a Super Bowl party. And I'm like, oh man, how much you didn't understand. Because at halftime when that was happening, we had the TV shut off sharing the gospel. And we saw, I don't remember the number that year, kids give their lives to Jesus Christ. There's going to be opposition. I understand that, and I hope you understand that as well. That's okay. It didn't discourage Nehemiah. It didn't at all. He was ready to move forward. He answers them, and he says, the God of heaven will give us success. All right, you three are against us. That's okay, because I know that God is with us. We are his servants, and we will start rebuilding. But as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it. Now, he speaks appropriately because not only, like from a historical perspective, they weren't Jews, and they had no claim to Jerusalem. Okay, they were people that were brought in to be officials during the Babylonian captivity and the exile and during the Persian rule. So they had been brought in. But Nehemiah is right. They had no claim or right to it. This was God's city. And God had put within Nehemiah to rebuild Jerusalem. And he says, so you've got no part of it. But God's going to give us success. So as we wrap up, here's what we want to do. The God-given passion turned into vision. And we say, okay, let's go for it. It is time to move forward. And so one of those things, and again, this is something that God has put within me, and Curtis and I have talked extensively about it, and that is being able to reach students. And one of the ways we do that is through the Super Bowl party on February the 4th. I'm going to ask you to get behind that in prayer. I'm going to be kind of like Nehemiah was, and whenever he went out and he said, okay, comes back, he says, we've got a plan. Let's start to do it. And my expectation is that the response is, all right, let's make it happen. From you students, I want to just be very honest with you. Not just the ones who are here every Sunday for student ministry, but every student, grades 6 through 12, that is in this place right now. My expectation of you is that you start thinking about who God can have you bring here to hear about the same message that you hear over and over and over again. I was privileged, and you are privileged, to be able to hear about Jesus. As a young person, I was brought up in church. We are living in a culture where, believe it or not, you have a lot of friends, and they don't know that there is a God who loved them so much that he sent his one and only Son to go to the cross and to purchase their eternity, purchase their salvation, the restored relation. You have a lot of friends that don't know that, so here's what I'm asking you to do. Every student that is in here, I want you to think about 10 names. 10 names. Not 6, not 7, not 8, at least 10 names that you can personally invite to be here to hear about Jesus. If you aren't willing to do that, I'm just going to be real blunt. You're being ridiculously selfish. I probably sound mean right about now, don't I? I'm not trying to be mean. The reality is this, is that people need Jesus. And if we just kind of put blinders on and pretend that our friends are going to somehow or another hear about Jesus without us, we're just being naive. And so I can just stand here as your pastor and let you be naive and pretend that it doesn't matter, but your friend's eternity does matter. So I'm asking you to do this, 10 people that you can specifically invite and say, hey, listen, we have all-you-can-eat pizza. Guys, I don't even care if you tell them that there are good-looking girls here. I don't mind. I don't care if they come for all the wrong reasons. I just want them here to hear about Jesus. I really do. I really do. A guy by the name of Ken Freeman, look him up sometime. He came to know Jesus because a friend invited him to a church event, and the only reason he went is because his friend told him there were good-looking girls there. And so he went. And it's funny, if you listen to his testimony sometimes, he's like, and the preacher got up, he's like, and my friend was singing in the choir, so I went up and I was in the choir with him. And the preacher starts preaching, and he says, there's some of you in here that you have been, and he talks about justified, and some of you in here have been sanctified, and he's like, some of you have been convicted, and he raised his hand because he'd been to jail before. And it's like, I kid you not, this is a true story. Ken Freeman, look him up sometime. Listen to his testimony. It's a pretty cool thing. He went there, and you know what happened? God got a hold of his heart. And so it might sound like I'm being kind of blunt with you as teenagers. I really am trying to be blunt with you as teenagers. You have the most influence you'll ever have. I'm asking you to think about 10 people. And we're going to have invite cards for them in 2 weeks. Now, you don't want to get them in their hands too early. You don't want to get them in their hands too late. We're going to have invite cards for you. All I'm asking you to do is just to hand it to somebody and say, hey, listen, got this Super Bowl party. I'd love for you to come. That's it. Simple. Okay? So, trust God and move forward. In Nehemiah's case, they were rebuilding a wall. In our case here, we're wanting to share with our community Jesus. Are you guys on board with that? Amen. I am. I hope you are too. So we're going to pray, and we don't have an ending song, which is very unusual for us. Paul, as soon as he was done playing here, he went home so as to not get anyone here sick. That was very kind of him to be here, and also kind of him to stay away from everyone so as to not, I mean, it really is, right? Nobody likes it whenever somebody comes and like gets others sick, and so he's like, listen, I'll come and I'll play. And so he's already gone home. So what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to stand with me, and we're going to pray. And I'm going to ask you to just kind of allow these things, the passion has got to put within you, allow it to be turned into vision, and then take the steps to be put into action. So I've talked pretty harshly, not harshly, but boldly to the teenagers. I also talk boldly to you adults right now. We have 2 sign-up sheets right here. Can you hold them up, Becca? There is a blue one and there is a gray one. And this is where we need you as adults to come in. Because if I'm asking your students to really put themselves out there, I'm asking you as a congregation to put yourself out there too. And we have ways that you can donate things and ways you can volunteer. And my expectation is that we come together and make this happen. So, Father, thanks for your word. And you got me wound up today. And that's okay, Lord, because I thank you for the passion you've put within me to see people come to know you. Because this is never about me and it's never about our church. It's always about you. And for the students that are here, it's not about them and it's not about their popularity and it's not about anything other than them being willing to say, you know what, I have a friend, I have friends who don't know Jesus, and I'm willing to put myself out there. I'm willing to invite them to this party so they can hear about Jesus. And Lord, I just ask that you place your blessing upon it. For any who would stand in opposition to it, Lord, I pray that you would work on their hearts and change it, and allow us to just be able to move forward together in unity to see you accomplish great things. I ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.